Hello, I'm so glad you're here to join me today. We're going to look at a very famous passage today from the Gospels. In fact, the story we're going to look at is the origin of the expression which you have often heard, render unto Caesar. Often this passage is thought of as the basis for a belief in separation of church and state. As a matter of fact, that mode of thought has existed for some 400, 500 some years. The reformers, the Protestant reformers, were the first to explain this passage in that way. And of course, in our mode of thinking anyway, we're used to thinking of our world as being in different compartments. Like there's the compartment of religion, and then there's politics or political science, and then there's other types of science, and then there's history, and then there's psychology. And we're used to thinking of everything as being in separate compartments, or at the academy, they would be in separate departments. But really that mode of thinking, while it did exist among the Protestant reformers, is largely based on Enlightenment. In terms of philosophy, it comes from the period of Enlightenment, and it really is a far cry from what Jesus was talking about. In fact, in Jesus' world, the idea of separating religion and politics would have been a completely incomprehensible idea in the days of Jesus. In the Roman Empire, Roman religion and the reign of Caesar were tied up together, and they were inseparable. For that matter, among the Jews, their belief in God and their service in the temple was indivisible from their political ideas at the time. So in Jesus' world, nobody was dividing politics and religion. In fact, Jesus was not trying to do that in this passage at all. But I think what Jesus was trying to accomplish will become clear as we examine this story once more. Now, in our story, we have Pharisees who are in cahoots with somebody or a group that are called Herodians, and they're in cahoots to try to trap Jesus in his words. Now, the Pharisees did not like the rule of Caesar, and they detested the rule of Caesar. They hated paying taxes to Caesar, and they would love to pick up swords and rebel against Caesar. They despised him. The Herodians, on the other hand, were Jews who had become quite complacent or quite comfortable with the Herodian leadership that had once existed in Jerusalem. Now, the Herods weren't reigning in Jerusalem at this point in the story, but the Herodians had been in cahoots with Herod, who was then in cahoots with Caesar. So out of the Herodians, you would have great loyalty to Caesar. The Pharisees would be disloyal to Caesar. In fact, they would want to rebel against him. These are normally enemies in this story, but they have common ground. And that common ground is they want to get rid of Jesus. And so they're working together to ask Jesus a question, to try to trap him in his words and discredit him either with the people or discredit him with Caesar, which would then perhaps result in his crucifixion. So the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words, that is, to trap Jesus in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. So when Jesus sees Herodians and Pharisees walking up to him together, that'd be a hunch that something is very peculiar right in this moment. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." We've got pretentious flattery here. "You aren't swayed by others," they continued, "because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion?" is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Remember that Pharisees hated paying the tax. They would rather not pay the tax. In fact, regularly groups of Pharisees would rise up and commit insurrection together, and they would rebel against the Roman authorities and try to discontinue paying taxes. And again, the Herodians were quite comfortable with Roman authority, and they might not like paying taxes, who does, but they were certainly willing to pay taxes to Caesar, and at least did not find it religiously disagreeable. So, Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus was not about to fall for their trap. In fact, the text says that Jesus knew their evil intent. He knew something was up. And he said this to them, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me?" Again, were they looking to really find out the way of God from Jesus? Certainly not. They're looking to trap him in his words, and Jesus knows this right off. But he said this, "Show me the coin used for paying the tax." Now, a devout Jew would be very disinclined to carry around Roman currency. Only a Jew whose commitment to the Lord was questionable would carry such currency around. The reason for that will be made clear in a moment. They brought him a denarius. A denarius was a coin that was pressed in the Roman world. It was a coin. It was their currency. And Jesus asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Now, Jesus didn't ask this question because he was stupid. He knew whose image it was, and he knew what the inscription said. But Jesus was very clever, and you'll see why in a moment. First of all, he asked the question, whose image is this? He used the word image. Now, you and I are created in the image of God. And God had commanded the Israelites, do not make an image. One of the reasons a devout Jew would not be caught dead walking around with Roman currency, except perhaps if extremely necessary for paying the tax, they would not walk around carrying that coin because it bore the image of the emperor. The coin itself was a reminder to the Jews that they were not autonomous, that they were not free, that they were under the control of Caesar Tiberius. That if Caesar Tiberius wanted them to do this, they had to do this. And if he wanted them to do that, they were required to do that under the threat of death. The image was a violation of the second commandment. Furthermore, Jesus asked the Herodians and the Pharisees, whose inscription? Now, the coin said, Caesar Augustus Tiberius, son of the divine Augustus. The coin claimed that the Caesar who was on the throne was the son of the divine. He was the son of God. Not only did the coin bear his image, and he was an idol in his world, but it also was blasphemous. It declared that he was the Son of God. It called him also the high priest. Now, who's the high priest? Certainly not Caesar. The high priest was in Jerusalem. He served at the temple. The coin was blasphemous. That is why a devout Jew would not want to carry it about, would not want anything to do with it. Jesus tricked them in the first place by saying, which of you has a denarius? And they confessed by their holding it that they were walking around with an object that was blasphemous. To have the coin was damning. So they responded, of course, whose image is this and whose inscription? The answer, of course, was Caesar's. Jesus didn't ask because he didn't know. He was setting them up to make a confession. Caesar's, they replied. Then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Now, Jesus is responding in an incredibly clever way. He is not dividing reality along a line that makes it where one sphere of our life pertains to religion and another sphere of our life pertains to politics. That is not what's going on here at all. Caesar in his image in the inscription was religious. We're not talking about politics when we look at the coin. We're talking about religion. Now, are taxes political? Yes, but in the Roman mind, and as demonstrated by the coin, politics and religion were inseparable in the ancient Roman world. So here's what Jesus was saying. He's saying, look, that coin, it's blasphemous. Get rid of it. Give it where it came from. It bears his image, therefore it belongs to him. Give him back his image. Pay him in his own coin, if you will pardon the double entendre. Give him back what belongs to him. Get rid of that junk. Jesus is doing two things. One, he is not falling into their trap and coming off as counter-imperial in such a way that would bring his condemnation by the authority of Caesar and his representative, and that would be in Jerusalem, Pontius Pilate. He doesn't fall into that trap. However, at the same time, he does not condone the authority of Caesar. He does not affirm that Caesar is the world's true Lord, like he claimed for himself. He does not affirm that Caesar Tiberius is the son of the divine Augustus. He does not affirm that. And so to say, get rid of that coin and give it back to him, while it was not condemnable, at the same time, it was very counter-imperial, because he was implicitly condemning the denarius. You see what's going on there then? But then he said this, give to God what is God's. Now, earlier we had the discussion, we looked at the coin and we said, whose image is on it? Whose inscription? Oh, then it belongs to Caesar, give to Caesar. What bears God's image? Or better put, who bears God's image? You see, if the coin that bears the Caesar's image belongs to Caesar, then the person or the parts of creation that bear the image of God belong to God. So the answer to the question is, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. That is, get rid of those coins and give it back to Caesar. And who bears the image of God? You do. Then give to God what is God's. Give God yourself, your whole self. So this conversation is thoroughly concerned with religious concerns. It's not politics and then religion in separate spheres. They're inseparably intertwined. You are made in the image of God. And political decisions always have an implication for the image of God. Therefore, from a biblical perspective, we cannot separate politics from religion. Why? Because politics is not outside of the sphere of God. we cannot separate religion from politics. Why? Because politics pertains to policies concerning the image of God. That's a religious concern, not merely a political one. Politics is a subset of religion, not a separate category. So, when the Herodians and the Pharisees heard what Jesus said, they were amazed because he had outwitted them. And so they left. They left him and they went away. Now, how does this pertain to you and me? Well, you and I are in the middle of a campaign season. You and I are being barraged with political advertisements all the time. In fact, the reality is sometimes they're popping up in the playlist that I set up. I didn't devise it that way. They're just automatically selected and played by YouTube for whatever reason. We must remember that when we are involved in voting, that it is a religious, not a political exercise. And as we pursue voting, we need to remember a few things. First of all, our allegiance is not, nor should ever be, to either political party. That is not to say you cannot be registered with a party. Sure, register with a party. I'm registered with a party. But at the end of the day, I am not a Democrat. At the end of the day, I am not a Republican. As a matter of fact, I'm a monarchist. And the monarch that I serve is Jesus because he is the world's proper king. Give to God what is God's. I want to give you a couple things to think about as you make up your mind concerning what candidate to vote for. First of all, there is not, nor has there necessarily ever been, an ideal candidate. The reality is that you're going to have to look at your ballot and you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons of each candidate, perhaps even make a chart listing the pros and cons of each candidate. And you're going to have to make the best decision you can while acknowledging that there is some gray in who you pick, acknowledging that whoever you pick, there's some things that you might rather they not think or believe. That's an unfortunate reality. But we need to go through and think through several different issues as we try to choose who to vote for in the election. For example, we need to consider issues such as abortion and consider how voting for either candidate might impact the future of abortion in the United States of America. We need to think through what does the Bible say about abortion and how best to vote concerning that issue. We need to consider LGBTQ issues, how they're being expressed in the United States at the present time, and how your vote might impact the future of how those issues are handled in the United States. We need to think about issues such as health care and how health care will be impacted based on who wins the election. We need to think about issues such as religious liberty. How will religious liberty be impacted based on which candidate you vote for? There are issues concerning immigration and the way that immigrants are treated and the way we treat refugees and what the Bible says our attitude should be toward immigrants and refugees. And that should weigh into our selection of a candidate. And so, as you'll probably see, we are at a moment in time where a selection is not particularly easy. As a matter of fact, it can be quite challenging. I'd encourage you to make a list of perhaps these issues or more. And consider how the candidate or candidates, after all, there's more than one thing to vote on this ballot, for the members of North Rome Baptist Church. But as you go through and you look at the various candidates, you could perhaps make a chart and weigh very carefully how the various candidates come down on the various issues. That might mean that you end up voting for more than one party over the course of any given ballot. I would encourage you to have an open mind. I would encourage you to not necessarily vote your party, but rather to vote the issues. God has not called you to be a Republican. God has not called you to be a Democrat. God has called you to be a monarchist. Jesus is the world's rightful king. And so I want to encourage you to prayerfully consider this election. Politics is not part of a different sphere than religion. Separation of church and state is an idea that's rooted in the Enlightenment. It's not rooted in the Bible. So we have challenging decisions as Christians moving forward in this election season. God bless you, and go with God.